I don't feel like I need to do much of an intro for this. Arcane's a good show, we all love it. I want to talk about its music. At the beginning, I'm going to talk about all the really good stuff, and then in the middle, I'll be talking about the one bad thing, and then more of the good at the end. If we're being real, the title should have been Random Assorted Thoughts About Arcane's Music, but that would have been too long. And before we start, I just want to say that this is all just my opinion and my interpretation. It is okay to see things differently, because there's bound to be multiple ways to interpret all of this. And if you have a different interpretation, please feel free to comment, because I would love to hear it. And also, I'm only going to be talking about Season 1, since at the time of writing this, Season 2 is not out yet, so don't worry about spoilers for that. But at the same time, spoiler warning for some major moments in Season 1. But anyway, on with the video. Arcane has a very clear language when it comes to its music. It takes on a more classical and pristine feeling when focusing on Piltover, and more of a punk and rough vibe when looking at Zaun. And these can sometimes intersect. The violin especially is sometimes used to represent intense emotion for people from both sides. This isn't going to be an extensive deep dive into every single connection in the soundtrack, just a few of the ones that I like. The first motif I want to talk about is about Powder/Jinx, and while it does appear in future episodes, I mainly want to look at how it's used in episodes 1 and 3. In the first episode, after the kids escape the enforcers, they get into a fight with some other kids. Powder is entrusted with the goods they stole, and while the others fight and she sits out, we hear this piece play. The violin here is very soft and delicate while Powder stays out of the fight and watches. This moment doesn't seem very important on the surface, but it's the first appearance of Powder's motif. And while it does represent Powder and later Jinx, it also somewhat represents Powder's desire to support her friends and family, which she feels she's never been able to do. Powder in this scene is seeing everyone fighting and feels ashamed that she can't help, just sitting by while holding onto the bag. She wants to help, but she feels she'll just get in the way. Now let's jump forward to episode 3. So after Vi, Milo, and Clagger have left to go save Vander, we see Powder having a breakdown from being told to stay behind. This chilling scene is the first real hint of Jinx that we see in her, and the music reflects that as well as helps portray what's going on in her head. The violin feels muffled, muted, and echoey, playing quick and jittery fragmented phrases. These effects put on the violin and the way it's playing further expresses Powder's feelings right now. Just like before, she wants to assist them, but unlike then, she's being actively told not to this time. She's being forced to suppress her creativity when, above all else, she has a strong desire to help them, and her mind is racing and thinking about a million things at once. Just like how the violin feels, suppressed yet out of control. But later, after she decides to go help, when she sends in her invention, which explodes just as planned, we hear the violin again. It's the same motif, just with parts in a different octave or key, and now the violin is freed from the muted and suppressed sound we heard earlier, and now phrases are flowing into one another and they're less fragmented. Everything's come together for Powder and she thinks she's finally helping. This piece combines Powder's relief and joy that her invention finally worked, as well as the harsh realities that she didn't intend. The violin is soaring and hopeful, just like Powder's attitude while she's being blown away by the explosion, believing she just saved everyone. But the instruments underneath it are dark and troubling, telling us what's actually going on as the explosion kills people on both sides. And these small motifs for her appear in future episodes, like the part where Silco took her to the lake. And because they reached their apex here, it further shows how much this day ended up defining her life. That brief scene of her having a breakdown was a glimpse into the future both for her character and her music. And now I want to talk about everyone's favorite Ace King, Viktor. Even though the Piltover plotlines always seemed centered around Jace, I always felt like the real heart of this half of the story was Viktor. Growing up in Zaun, he was poor and had a limp. But in spite of his physical and financial limitations, he was very creative and had a talent for inventing, and would always be working on his own inventions instead of being social. This is how Heimerdinger noticed him, and what led to Viktor being brought on as his assistant at the Piltover Academy. So suddenly, he's brought from this bleak undercity into a brighter future, filled with hope that he can really change the world with his brilliant mind. And this is all represented by his theme. The violin stepping down and then suddenly rising up an octave to have a brighter color feels like it's not just portraying Viktor's character but his life, starting off briefly sounding somber before being lifted up, ultimately sounding very hopeful. We hear it even in the episode right before, episode 5. During the scene when Jace is doing something there, I don't know, while Viktor is working on the hex core. During that scene, it already feels like his theme has undergone significant development as it dramatically flourishes throughout it, ending in a dark way with the first few notes of his motif being played by some harsh brass, like it's foreshadowing the dark path he's starting to take. And as Viktor continues to meddle with the hex core, his theme gets darker and darker. Whenever the theme comes back, it's most of the time just those first 4 notes that step down, the more melancholy part of the first section of the original piece, giving it more precedence than the hopeful part right after. And listen here to how the piece's second section morphs into something much more intimidating. And in the episode right after that, episode 8, when Viktor's gone the farthest he's been when working on the hex core, the first part of that original motif is repeated over and over. As he's changed while pursuing this dark path, his motif has changed with him, sounding less like hopefulness and more like desperation as he tries to prevent his death and gets consumed by his work. I really love the way Viktor's motif takes a downward spiral along with him. It's probably my favorite part of the show's score. But I'm going to switch our attention to the last theme I want to talk about, Dear Friend Across the River. The entire show opens with Powder singing it while she walks along the bridge with Vi. After she sings it, it transitions into an instrumental version, and changes to something more hopeful as Vander decides to stop fighting and take care of them, the theme building more and more until the scene ends. We see the motif reappear in other instances too, like after the explosion at the end of Jinx and Echo's fight. But first I want to talk about its origin. And I'm not talking about the first scene, because this motif didn't actually originate from the show, but from a champion in League itself. They're one of my favorites, Kindred, the personification of death in Runeterra, represented by Lamb and Wolf, the two sides of death that either offer a peaceful end to those who accept it, or a violent one to those who run from it. And Reddit user Spectre made a connection between them in Arcane. In the game, there are a few voice lines you'll sometimes hear of Lamb eerily humming different melodies. And one of these tunes that she hums matches Dear Friend Across the River almost exactly, just transposed down and in a different time signature. Da, 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 da. And it's possible that this could be a coincidence or just a simple Easter egg, but with how perfectly they match up and how it also fits the show thematically, I just don't think so. In the show, this song is synonymous with death itself, as well as the seemingly endless cycle of violence between Piltover and Zaun. At the beginning, when Powder's humming it, they're walking on a bridge that just had a massive fight between the two factions and now is littered with dead bodies. And later in the show, right after Jinx bombed and killed a bunch of enforcers on the same bridge, she's humming it. I think they deliberately chose this tune Lamb hums to subtly connect the music to the cycle of violence and death seen throughout the show. And this cycle is further represented by the other connection to Dear Friend I want to talk about. Though I will admit, it's probably a bit of a stretch. I still personally think it's intentional, but just take it with a grain of salt because I could definitely be looking too far into it. So, in the very last scene of the show, as Jinx is about to send a rocket to the council chamber where they're voting to peacefully resolve the conflict, we hear the song What Could Have Been start to play. It's a really beautiful and emotional song with lyrics that both mirror the broken bond between Jinx and Vi and the strife between Zaun and Piltover. And just like most of the other scenes in the show with intense emotion, we have a solo violin here alongside the singer. There are a lot of beautiful moments in this song I could talk about, but what I want to focus on is the last solo the violin has near the end. The violin is flourishing with a lot of triplets in succession, and as it's reaching the solo's end, the last bar before the singer comes back, it has these repeated triplets. I had mentioned that once Powder was done singing Dear Friend Across the River, that the score then played an instrumental version of the song, and once it's finished with the main theme of the piece, it goes into a section where basically for the rest of the piece it also has triplets, with some parts of it, including the beginning, having the same kind of contour and repetition as that measure in What Could Have Been. And the reason I'm saying this is a bit of a stretch is that this kind of down-up contour is very, very common. Not even just in the show, but it's incredibly common in music in general. But the reasons I have for believing that this was an intentional connection has to do with how both the bridge piece plays out, and for how it connects to the general themes of the story as a whole. Firstly is the fact that so much of the bridge piece is characterized by the down-up contour. Most of the triplets in the second section of the piece have that kind of motion. And since most of the violins part in what could have been does not have that motion, and this one bar in the most emotional section of the song does have it, leads me to believe it's intentional. But what most of all makes me think it's connected is the implications it has for the story. It would add to the thematic cohesion of the entire show, the very last scene mirroring the very first. This contour within the triplets played at the beginning after a massive fight when Vander, after seeing the devastation that all this fighting led to, decided to choose love over violence. Whereas Jinx at the end, having her heart broken over and over again, chooses to give in to her rage and kill even more people, which is bound to incite an even larger confrontation than when she was a child, and which further continues this seemingly endless cycle of violence that Vander tried so hard to stop by raising her. Wow, I really love this show's music. Hey wait, why is that word almost in the title again?
Shut the fuck up! Shut the fuck up!
Okay, I really want to reiterate, this is just my opinion. It is okay if you disagree. It is okay if we have completely different opinions on this song. But with that said, I hate it. Enemy fails on so many levels for me that it is astounding. I honestly shouldn't be devoting such a large section of the video to it, because on a soundtrack this amazing, this is the only one that sticks out, and that is impressive. But I've had these gripes with it for so long that I just need to get it all out. I'm gonna try and go layer by layer in explaining why this song doesn't work for me. I'll first say I'm not gonna talk about the lyrics themselves at all. I think they're basically fine, and nothing really sticks out and annoys me, except for the look out for yourself line that comes in every now and then. I just feel like it doesn't fit, and it especially feels odd at the end of the opening version. I mean, come on, the best ad-lib ever already exists, why even try anymore? But lyrics aside, my biggest issue with Enemy is that the accompanying track is extremely bland and repetitive. It has one of the most basic drum patterns that I've ever heard, only having hits every 8th note with no change in complexity at all, along with the guitar strumming the same 2 notes back and forth on the offbeats over and over, and some electronic hits at the beginning of each bar, again going back and forth between 2 notes. And if it were just like that during the verses, it wouldn't be that bad. But it barely changes when getting to the other sections of the song. The most that it adds when getting to the choruses are those brass attacks at the beginning of each bar, and some hi-hat hits also on every 8th note. There's no deviation from the simple rhythms we've already had, and not much added at all, just more percussion hits with absolutely no complexity. There are some added electronic swells on the offbeats and the post-choruses, but it's just not enough. This plain simplicity is present and constant throughout the whole song. And I know this may seem like I'm nitpicking, like it's just in the background behind the singing, what's the problem? But it's not just the background of the song, it's the foundation of it. And when the foundation of a song is lacking this much, it just makes everything else that much weaker. With any pop song, even if they want their general vibe to stay consistent for the whole song, 9 times out of 10 they will still have the verses, choruses, bridge, and everything in between all feel distinctly different. You rise for a while, then fall back a bit, then rise again, then fall back. It's a pattern that's present in nearly every song ever, because that's just how you do a music. But here, because there's no significant difference in the background when we get to what are supposed to be the bigger moments of the song, like the chorus, it makes those moments feel a lot less big and gives a feeling of dull monotony through the song's entirety. If a song never has any rising or falling action at all, what is there to get invested in? The only times the song actually feels even slightly different is the rap section and the final chorus. But the rap section is only different on the surface, because of how different the rapping is from the singing. It still has almost the exact same background elements as before. The rapping is a great detour, sure, just not enough to dig it out of the sameness present in the rest of the song. And for the last chorus, it does definitely have a couple things that make it feel different and bigger, like more electronic swells and background singing, but honestly, by that point, it's too little too late to me.
Bing bong, hey, what's up? You're doing a bad job.
Now, that's the main problem. The monotony of it all and how it feels like there's no forward motion in the song. But I keep on feeling crazy with my friends all liking this song and me being one of the only ones who doesn't, and I just need to fully explain why it's bad. So the other part that really gets to me is how this song is structured harmonically. And to fully explain that, I need to dive into some music theory and briefly explain the very basics of chords. Don't worry, it won't get too complicated, because they definitely didn't bother getting too complicated. Now, with any given key, you're going to be looking at mainly 7 different chords, built up from the 7 scale degrees of that key. It goes from 1 to 7 and then back to 1 as you get higher. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And different chords in the key will be major or minor, depending on the quality of the key you're in. There's a lot more to it than that, and more chords you can make if you dig a little deeper, but that's not what we're focusing on right now. So, chord progressions are the patterns we make when moving from chord to chord. And there are different ways to use chord progressions. There can be one progression that's looped for the whole song, or a song could even have multiple different progressions in different sections, or a number of possibilities. And in pop music, there are a bunch of different progressions that are commonly used, like the puff or the lament or the doo-wop. And these progressions can range from cycling through 4 different chords, 3, or sometimes 2. And which progression does Enemy use? None of them. It's none of them. Which is fine, it's more than okay to be different. But is it different for a good reason? Well, Enemy is in B minor and only consists of 2 chords, an F sharp major triad, and a G major 7th chord. Those are the 5th and 6th chords of the key. And on the surface, it's not that bad, right? I mean, the most basic progression they could have done is a 1-5 and they did a 6-5. So I guess it's good that they did the bare minimum and didn't do that? But something's not right. I sense a 1 chord in disguise. Okay, I'm definitely exaggerating a bit, but to be honest, while this is a 6 chord, the way that they voice it makes it really feel like they wanted it to be a 1, but change it to a 6 to make it sound less boring. But what do I mean by that? Well, what are the notes we hear from those brass attacks in the choruses I mentioned? B, A sharp, B, A sharp. It's just repeating like that over and over. That's literally music theory week 1, learning 1-5 progressions and having the top voice repeat like that. Do, ti, do, ti, do. And what are the other notes we hear in the background? Like with the bass is playing or the electronic swells. G, F sharp, G, F sharp. This entire song, the only motion the background has is essentially thirds going down and up a half step, again and again, with no deviation, and it drives me insane. There is absolutely no nuance to these chords, and they voice them in the most boring possible way. And I've seen a couple people here and there be like, oh golly gee, it's so impressive that they made this song work with just 2 chords.
No! It's just dumb.
And I'm not at all trying to say that every pop song needs to conform to the normal kinds of progressions. It can be really cool when songs break away from these patterns or use multiple progressions in one song. But the thing is, they need to break away from it for a good reason. It could be because the songwriter has a unique idea they want to explore, or they want to make something more complicated than normal, or a multitude of different compelling reasons. But the reason for Enemy being different and quirky as far as I can tell is laziness. Restricting it to just these 2 chords and voicing it the way they did doesn't make it more challenging for them or interesting for us. It just dumbs it down for everyone involved. But, and this is a big but, almost none of this applies to the opening version of the song. I've actually always really liked this version. And I'm not saying this to try and save face or anything. Everything I just said still applies to the full version. But I have to give credit where it's due, because the opening version actually feels like they tried. And I have a personal little guess about whoever arranged this version. A theory, if you will. You see, I believe that whoever arranged this version of Enemy also hates Enemy, because basically every problem I mention is fixed. Firstly, it's much shorter. Thank goodness it's shorter. But the big thing is that everything in the background is entirely different. There are strings during the verse that actually play different notes and give it the tension it needs as it's building up. The chorus feels completely different from the verse too, and actually feels as important as it should. It has a lot more going on with more electric swells and glissandos, and the drum pattern actually feels cool and varied. Another reason why it feels different is because they even changed the time signature of the verse. They listened to the singing of that part and realized, hey, this could work in 6/8 too. And so they just changed the background to be in 6/8 and it works. It gives the verse a swaying feeling as it builds up and makes it feel grander when we change to the more powerful motion of the 4/4 at the chorus. The very simple harmonic structure of the song is still there, of course, but because it's been shortened down to a minute and there's a lot more variation in how it's used, it's a lot easier to bear. So yeah, the opening version slaps and the full version sucks big doo-doo. Bye! Okay, future me talking here. So as of now, Riot's also released the full version of the opening version of Enemy. And yeah, multiply everything I said by tenfold. It's so much better than the original version. Oh my gosh. Okay, so I got pretty negative in the last section, but out of the entire show, my biggest problem being one song that doesn't even play in its entirety within the show isn't that big of a deal. And seeing as how I genuinely love this show a lot, I wanted to end the video with something a lot more positive. And since I love all the other pop songs that were written for the show, why not just rank all of them? This will be based on individual quality of the song itself, how well they're implemented into the scenes they're in, as well as how good the scene itself is. And again, this is all just my opinion. With how good most of these songs are, I could totally see them being swapped around in a lot of different ways. So it really just came down to personal preference and how I was feeling in the moment. So let's start with... Okay, just so we're clear, the difference in quality from 11 to 10 shoots up by a lot. No song from here on out is bad at all. Although, to be honest, I don't really have much to say about these next few. And with that said, Our Love is an alright, very tender song. Feeling like a love song pulled right from the 60s. It's a nice representation of the bond between Powder, Vi, and Vander, and plays in a scene that shows all of that. Powder's going to Vander for comfort, while Vi is trying to solve the current situation and save both of them from trouble. It's a sweet song during a good scene, but not really much more than that to me. The scene that Dirty Little Animals plays in is pretty good, but it's very short and just meant as a quick reintroduction to Zahn to show how far it's fallen after Vander died, and Soko introduced Shimmer to the residents. The song is really loud and in your face and sort of drowns out everything else, just like how a lot of citizens of Zahn are using Shimmer to ignore the horrible conditions around them. The lyrics of the song describe what the addiction feels like very well too, and another thing that adds to that is how overstimulating the song and scene is. The music's blasting in your ears with a heavy beat while the visuals are abrasive with quick cuts and shaky cam, giving everything a disorienting feeling. It's a good scene that shows how much worse Zahn has gotten over the years. This fight scene is so fun, and the song is pretty good too, but I literally do not have much more to say than that. And my favorite part of the scene happens after the song is over, so, I mean, the intro was really good when Vi walks in the background, and then they have a classic stare down timed with the music. And it's perfect to have an upbeat ragtime song over a bar fight. So, yeah, okay, next. Here's where it gets good. Even though this one's pretty low, this might be one of the songs on here that I've put on the most. It's really satisfying to listen to. The rapping flows well, and whenever the singer comes in, it feels so impactful. I love how it represents the Firelight so well by having lyrics that speak both to what they believe in and what they've experienced, as well as to the general themes of the show at large. It's also used in a pretty cool way, having its own mini music video at the beginning of episode 7 to reintroduce us to the Firelights. It uses a more unique visual style than the rest of the show, sort of furthering the idea that this group doesn't want to be compared to any of the other factions in the show. It's so good I wish we got a full music video for it in this style. Honestly, that's one of the biggest sins of the show's music. Why does Enemy get a full music video when none of the other songs do? The closest we get is this and Dynasties and Dystopias, which are both amazing and look stunning, but neither have their songs in their entirety. It's just not fair, man. Okay, but I guess I've already filled my complain about Enemy quota for the video, so back to the actual good music. After seeing how pristine and perfect Topside looks in the beginning, we get introduced to the underbelly of the city through the visuals and the song as our characters walk by, and it's a perfect fit. B. Miller puts on a deep voice that's dark and ominous, but with an alluring tone alongside it, representing the feeling you might get from walking through this place for the first time. I also love how the percussion sounds very metallic most of the time, as if someone's working on an invention in the background. This song does a good job of sucking you into the atmosphere of the Undercity, and I love it. In a scene with such mixed emotions, Guns for Hire elevates them and the already impactful visuals. It's pretty interesting harmonically too, using a borrowed chord as part of the progression, which adds to the underlying melancholic feeling of the scene. The highlight of the scene though, of course, is Jinx. It's uplifting seeing her finally have hope again and finding out Vi might be alive and then light the flare for her. And the shot circling her with her visions of Milo and Clagger is really good. It's like it's showing every part of her is trying to reach out to Vi in this moment, and it's so powerful. I personally believe that the first 3 episodes of this show are very close to perfection. I absolutely love how it completely tricks you, at first seeming like a normal but really good young adult adventure show when following Vi, Milo, Clagger, and Powder, feeling like everything's gonna be okay in the end, and then hitting you with such a dark and morbid ending in the 3rd episode. And what really helps with this massive gut punch is Goodbye. The lyrics in the first half of the song are so heartbreaking and relevant to this entire situation. I love how that first half is mostly so tender and delicate, and then in the second half it builds and builds to become so much more passionate and mournful by the end. It's almost as if it were mirroring what you might feel in a situation like this, frozen stiff and about to break before your emotions start to well up more and more until it's uncontrollable. Another very important factor as to why the song works is Ramsey's voice. She uses such a delicate tone for most of it that really sells the deep emotion of the scene. The only reason this song isn't in the top 3 is that technically it's only actually playing during the show for a little bit, with most of it playing over the credits. But I still think the way it's used in that moment is very effective. It has a gentle but haunting opening that comes in right after Silco holds Powder, an already harrowing visual, along with some really touching lyrics coming in as the episode fades away. And playing it over the end of the episode and letting it go on into the credits acts to prolong the sorrow from the genuinely tragic ending. This one always draws me in completely and leaves me in such a somber mood by the end. Snakes is a really fun and exciting song that I don't have much to say about, but what places this near the top is the scene it was made for, because damn, this is a good fight. This is the most exhilarating scene in the whole show, and the action is so kinetic and fluid. The way it builds up Vi entering into showing that powerful first blow is so dynamic and strong. I love how every hit from the Hextech weapons is accentuated with flashes of bright blue light, which briefly shows x-rays of their opponents and how much damage they're doing. I love how it's set up right beforehand that these shimmer juggernauts are incredibly deadly and terrifying, yet it still feels believable in how they're able to fight them. Jace's fighting style is the most unique in the show so far, and it's so fun to watch him switch from hitting like a normal hammer to having a small burst of energy to being a long-range blaster. And the song getting more distorted near the end of the scene when Jace starts losing it is a good touch. It's amazing, and if you've seen the show, you already know it's amazing. But it's only my second favorite fight scene. The snake scene might still be the most exciting and exhilarating fight of the season, but this one's my favorite. This scene pits two characters together that have very different relationships with their traumatic pasts. As we see throughout the whole show, Jinx is so absorbed into the past with her constant reminders of that fateful day in the form of her visions and the voices in her head, understandably unable to properly confront those horrors and move on. And Echo seems to be very in the moment thus far, focusing more on the problems at hand and not liking to dwell on his past, likely suppressing it. But here he's finally confronting it by fighting Jinx and letting Vi go on ahead instead of himself. We see them as kids practicing fighting intercut with their real fight now, the firelight behind Echo symbolizing the hope and community he strives for, with the crow behind Jinx representing all the death and despair she's brought and will bring. The fact that Echo loses the fight as a kid, with it presumably not being the only time with how disappointed he is, makes him winning in the present that much more powerful. It helps illustrate how he's not only beaten Jinx, but also conquered his trauma from back then, finally being able to properly move on. It's an absolutely stunning sequence through and through. On the other hand, the way it incorporates the music into the visuals is really interesting. Firstly, almost everything happens on the beat. Whether it's a cut to a different perspective, or Jinx shooting her gun, or just a simple quick zoom in, it's all on the beat. For example, in this part of the sequence, it zooms in on the clock for a moment to show that 1 second has passed in the fight. That zoom in happens on beat 1, then Jinx shoots on beat 3 of the next measure, and then Powder shoots on beat 1 in the measure after that. Almost every little moment like that in this song happens in sync with the beat, but it even goes a little deeper than that. So this entire sequence is animated on 4s, meaning there's a new frame of animation every 4th frame. And this is meant to be a reference to Echo's ultimate in the game and how he's able to warp back in time 4 seconds. But what's really cool about this is that the song is in 4/4. Man, Jin is probably creaming right now. Fortnite! And they timed it so that the frames actually change every 16th note of the song. So not only are the big moments coinciding with the beat of the song, but the animation itself is essentially a visual metronome for the song too. And this connects to how they kind of physically have a metronome in the scene too, because Echo started the clock for their fight. This sequence is already so flashy and the song is really good, but it's these little details that really shoot it over the top for me. What Could Have Been is such a great song, which is part of an amazing conclusion for the season as a whole. Not only is it just a very emotionally powerful song, but it's also a really well-constructed scene that ties everything together and ends on one of the best cliffhangers I've ever seen. It has lyrics that obviously represent the relationship between Jinx and Vi, but also between Zaun and Piltover, and even Silco and Vander. What could have been if Vander and Silco reconciled when they were younger? What could have been if the elites of Piltover actually cared about the Undercity more than themselves? What could have been if Powder stayed home that day? And much like Ramsey and Goodbye, Sting uses such a soft and remorseful voice, and a lot of the time it sounds like he's holding back tears while singing. And if we're talking about great performers giving it their all, we cannot leave out Ray Chen. He is the MVP for this show when it comes to the performance side of the music. He did all the solo violin stuff throughout the score, and the solo viola at the very beginning, and he brings it all to a head with such transcendent playing in this song as the main violin. He plays the somber moments with such sincerity, and pushes it up to 11 with some insane passages in the second half. And I also really love how at the very end, when Sting sings his last line, there's no last violin note or piano chord underneath him. It's just silence, and it's so effective.
What could have been?
Not only is it such a powerful and heartbreaking way to end the song, but having all the instruments end on a chord that begs to be resolved, but leaving them unresolved with only the singer finishing the phrase and nothing else around him, thematically fits what is happening during this entire sequence. The council is voting to put an end to this entire conflict, and they finally come to a conclusion and agree on peace, before all of that is abruptly stopped by the rocket. I love this scene, and I really love this song, and it's not hard to see why. Well, that video was all over the place, but I hope you enjoyed it. Arcane is a very special show to me, and I'm glad I was able to make this to express that. I didn't talk about everything to do with the music, but I covered a lot of what I wanted to. This took longer for me to make than I thought, so as I'm editing and writing this ending, Season 2 is already over. Smeech is the best new character, by the way. Because of certain ways the music is used in Season 2, I really want to add or change a couple things here, but if I start doing that, I'll never finish this video. I may do a video on Season 2 in the future, but if I do, it'll be a while. The entire idea for this video was born out of the hype I had for Season 2, and now that it's done, I think I want to leave it for now. I still really loved it, I just want to give it more time to digest. But anyway, thank you so much for watching.